Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're embarking on a fascinating linguistic adventure. Not to a far-off land or, into dusty history books, but right into the very fabric of something we use every single day, language.
That's right.
Specifically, we're going to unpack the subtle, sometimes really surprising differences between words that, well, at first glance, they seem to mean almost the exact same thing.
Yeah.
You know that feeling, don't you? When you're searching for just the perfect word, that one precise term that captures exactly what you mean, but all the options, they just feel a little off.
Definitely. Or when you read something and a word just clicks.
Exactly, that perfect fit.
Mm.
That's the treasure we're kind of unearthing today. Our guide is, well, it's a real trove of linguistic insights. Excerpts from Webster's Dictionary of Synonyms and Antonyms, which was put together with the editors of Merriam-Webster.
And what's really illuminating here, I think, is how these entries go way beyond just simple definitions. They peel back the layers.
Yeah.
They show the precise contexts, the hidden connotations, even the emotional resonance that sets these seemingly similar words apart.
So it's not just what a word means.
Exactly. It's about how it works out in the wild, why you'd pick one over another in a specific situation, and maybe even what that choice tells you about the person using it. Grasping these differences isn't just about boosting your vocabulary. It's like gaining this deeper insight into how thought and expression really interact.
Okay, so our mission today is basically to pull out those key nuggets of knowledge, give you a kind of shortcut to being really well informed about the power and, I guess, the precision of English vocabulary.
Yeah, sharpening your communication.
Right. Sharpening communication, boosting understanding, and maybe sparking a few of those aha moments that could, change how you see words you use all the time. So, all right, let's unpack this linguistic toolkit. Understanding nuances in action, words describing movement. Let's kick things off with a group of words that describe sudden shirk movements. We all casually throw around words like jerk or snap, right? But have we really stopped to think about the specific imagery, the sort of kinetic force, the implications each one carries? The dictionary gives us jerk, snap, twitch, yank.
Okay.
So looking at these four, why do we even need so many options for what seems like a pretty simple, quick action?
That's a great question. And it really speaks to the incredible descriptive power we have in language.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine trying to describe a complex scene with just broad strokes. You'd lose all the life, right?
Absolutely.
Each of these words, yeah, they all mean a sudden, sharp, quick movement, but each one captures this unique facet of that action. They let us paint with much finer brushstrokes.
Finer brushstrokes, I like that.
Yeah, conveying not just that something moved, but how it moved, the quality of the movement, and often, the intent or maybe lack of intent behind it.
Yeah.
They're like little miniature stories in themselves.
Miniature stories. Okay, let's open that first story then with jerk. The dictionary says its core meaning stresses suddenness and abruptness, and it often implies a movement that's, quote, both graceless and forceful.
Right.
The example they give is, gave the dog's leash a quick jerk. Now, when you hear graceless and forceful, what kind of picture does that paint? And what does it tell us about the situation?
Well, immediately I picture a lack of smooth control. Like, a jerk isn't fluid. It's this sudden, almost uncontrolled burst of energy. Think about the difference, like you said, between a trainer maybe gently guiding a dog and someone impatiently jerking its leash. The word itself carries that abrupt, maybe even harsh quality.
Yeah, definitely feels harsher.
It's graceless. It lacks elegance.
Yeah.
It's often surprising in its suddenness and maybe uncomfortable for whoever's on the receiving end. It suggests, I don't know, a reactive or perhaps even an aggressive impulse, not a smooth, considered action. It's the kind of movement that makes you flinch, maybe?
That's a great point. It carries an emotional weight too, doesn't it? Like impatience, maybe, or a lack of finesse. How does that compare to our next word, snap? The source says snap implies a sharp, quick action that is abruptly terminated.
Right, that termination is key.
Yeah, often linked to things like biting, seizing, locking, or breaking suddenly. The example, the crocodile snapped at the child but missed. That abruptly terminated bit seems really crucial here. What's the significance of that sudden stop?
Well, that immediate stop is precisely what gives snap its distinctive feel. It's about a movement reaching its peak and ending almost instantaneously. Often with a sharp sound, maybe, or a decisive closure.
Like snapping your fingers.
Exactly. Quick, sharp, done. Or a twig snapping underfoot, it breaks. The action's over. It conveys this sense of finality, often an explosive, almost percussive quality.
Percussive, yeah.
Unlike a jerk, which might imply a sort of sustained, though abrupt, pull snap, is usually a single, isolated, decisive action. Often reflexive, like the crocodile's jaws, or maybe a quick, almost automatic response, like a lock snapping shut. It's about a sudden release of energy that's contained almost immediately.
Okay, so jerk is maybe more about the force and awkwardness, while snap is about that quick, sharp finality. Interesting. Now, what about twitch? This one applies to a light, sudden, and sometimes spasmodic movement. And the dictionary notes it usually combines tugging and jerking, but lightly. Our example is that lovely image of the sleeping cat, its body twitching as it dreamt. How do those elements, light and spasmodic, set it apart from jerk or snap?
Those are definitely the crucial differentiators. A twitch is often involuntary, right? A subtle, almost imperceptible flicker rather than a big, deliberate, forceful action.
Right, like an eyelid twitching.
Exactly. While it might technically have elements of tugging and jerking, they're minor and uncontrolled. Think of the difference between someone deliberately jerking a lever versus an eye twitching from fatigue.
Yeah, totally different feel.
The spasmodic nature suggests something less controlled, often a symptom of an internal state, a dream, like the cat, or nervousness, or muscle fatigue. It's a small, sometimes repetitive movement that doesn't usually achieve much displacement or impact, unlike the others we've discussed. It's almost like a ghost of a movement.
A ghost of a movement. I like that phrase. Okay, and then we have yank. This one implies a quick and heavy tugging and pulling. The example we have is to yank the bedclothes over one's head.
Right, the heavy part.
Exactly. How does that emphasis on heavy tugging and pulling make yank different from just a simple pull, or even from jerk?
Well, the weight and the effort are really paramount with yank. A simple pull can be gentle, it can be sustained, gradual, but a yank suggests significant, often considerable force applied over a pretty short distance, usually with a clear sense of effort or urgency.
Okay.
It's a much more assertive action than just pull. Think about pulling a drawer open slowly versus yanking a stubborn drawer open with force.
Yeah, you can picture the effort.
Right. It often implies a certain abruptness, maybe even a degree of violence or determination in the action. Whether you're yanking a stubborn weed from the ground or yanking a door open in a hurry, it conveys that sense of overcoming resistance with, raw power.
Okay, so if we tie all this together, the bigger picture, it becomes really clear how knowing these distinctions is about painting much clearer, more evocative pictures with your words.
Absolutely.
Whether you're, I don't know, a novelist describing a character's agitation, or a sports commentator narrating a key play, or just telling a friend what happened, choosing that precise word, that right brushstroke, it just transforms a vague description into something vivid.
Totally. Without these precise terms, you'd be stuck using multiple descriptive phrases, and you'd lose that concise power that a single well-chosen word gives you. It's the difference between just telling your audience and actually immersing them in the action.
Letting them feel the force of the jerk, maybe.
Exactly. Or the finality of the snap, the subtlety of the twitch, or just the sheer effort involved in a yank.
Yeah.
The art of evoking laughter, chest and its companions.
Now let's pivot from that kind of kinetic energy of movement to something that brings a different kind of energy, one that sparks joy for a lot of people: humor.
Ah, good one.
Our source material gives us this fantastic exploration of words describing something said or done to make people laugh. We've got jest, joke, quip, witticism, wisecrack, crack, gag.
Quite the lineup.
Yeah. This group is really fascinating to me because humor is so subjective, right? Yet our language has these incredibly specific tools to define its different forms. What's the deeper insight we get by dissecting these?
Well, it's precisely because it's subjective that these distinctions are so valuable. This group isn't just about funny. It's about the type of humor, the intent behind it, sometimes the impact it has, both good and bad.
Intent and impact.
Yeah. Understanding these nuances helps us appreciate the sheer range of humor, from just lighthearted playfulness to really sharp, insightful commentary. It shows how words capture the subtle, emotional, intellectual, even the social dimensions of laughter. Helps us categorize and maybe even create different kinds of comedic moments.
That's a great way to frame it. Okay, let's dive in, starting with jest. The dictionary defines it pretty broadly. Something said or done to evoke laughter, but what's really interesting is the connotation. It can be sarcastic, ironic, witty, or merely playful.
Quite a range.
And the example they offered is wry jests that were lost on her unsophisticated friends. Now, that example immediately tells me something. What does it suggest about the nature of a jest?
It really highlights that jest often implies a certain level of sophistication, maybe, or subtlety. It's not always direct. A wry jest suggests humor that's a dry, maybe ironic, and it might require a particular kind of intellect or shared understanding to really get it.
So it can go over someone's head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Precisely because it isn't overtly slapstick or obvious. It can be a sophisticated, clever form of playfulness that kind of invites the listener into a shared moment of wit. It hints at a playful intelligence, maybe, an intellectual sparring, rather than just a simple attempt at a laugh.
Oh, okay. So just has that intellectual, maybe understated quality. How does that stack up against joke? Joke has this fascinating dual nature. It may apply to an act intended to fool or deceive someone, like a prank.
The practical joke.
Right. Or it can be a story or remark designed to promote good humor. The example often used is, he's very good at taking a joke. That duality, prank versus narrative, that seems pretty significant, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. Joke is maybe the most versatile word here. It covers both that playful deception and the narrative-driven humor. The prank aspect, that immediately brings to mind practical jokes, and the humor comes from the setup and the reveal. The other side is the more common structured joke, setup, punchline. And that example, taking a joke, is key because it talks about the recipient's ability to handle lighthearted teasing or maybe even a minor humiliation in good spirits. It's often more direct in its aim to produce laughter than a jest, which, like we said, can be more about the cleverness itself.
That makes sense. Joke is often about the reaction, the reception. Okay, what about quip? Our source suggests it's a quick, neatly turned, witty remark. The example. Whatever the topic, she's ready with a quick quip. What does that emphasis on speed and neatness tell us about a quip?
Speed and conciseness, those are really the hallmarks of a quip. It's not a long story or a drawn-out setup. It's that perfectly timed, brief flash of wit that just hits right in the middle of a conversation.
Like a quick comeback.
Exactly. It speaks to verbal agility, quick thinking, the ability to respond cleverly and efficiently right in the moment. Someone who's ready with a quick quip, usually have a sharp mind, can turn a phrase effortlessly. It's about precision and impact in just a few words, often used to lighten the mood or make a pointed observation without, dwelling on it.
So a quip is like the verbal equivalent of a perfectly aimed dart. Okay, moving on to witticism. This implies a clever and often biting or ironic remark.
Biting is key there.
Yeah, the source gives a powerful example. Many felt the sting of that critic's witticism. That word sting. Pretty telling, isn't it?
Very telling. Witticism definitely leans towards intellectual cleverness, but it frequently carries an edge. The sting implies that while it's clever, maybe insightful, it can also be sharp, critical, even hurtful.
So not always just funny.
Right. It's insightful and pointed, often revealing a truth or an absurdity in a way that might make the target squirm a bit. Think of, like, Oscar Wilde's famous lines. They're brilliant, but they often cut pretty deep. A witticism demands a certain intellectual engagement from both the speaker and the listener, and it can be used for social commentary or critique, not just pure amusement.
Okay, so witticism has both that intellectual brilliance and a potential bite. How does that compare to wisecrack? The dictionary says it suggests a sophisticated or knowing witticism, but crucially, it may suggest flippancy or unfeelingness.
Ah, the flippancy.
Yeah. The example is a comic known for abrasive wisecracks. This flippancy or unfeelingness seems like a really key distinction.
Absolutely. Wisecrack shares that cleverness with witticism, but it often adds this layer of, like, street smarts, maybe cynicism or worldliness, that knowing quality you mentioned. The potential for flippancy or unfeelingness is really central. A wisecrack isn't necessarily trying to be kind or gentle. It's often more about shocking, challenging, or making a pointed observation with a sort of casual disregard for convention or, polite sensibilities. A comedian using abrasive wisecracks wants to provoke a reaction, often through irreverence or cynicism rather than just intellectual amusement. It's often a bit rougher around the edges than witticism.
That's a great distinction, the sort of edgy feel of wisecrack versus the maybe more refined intellectual sharpness of witticism. Then we have crack. This implies a sharp, witty, often sarcastic remark or retort.
A retort, yeah.
The example is responded to the challenge with a series of biting cracks. How does crack fit into this whole spectrum of humor?
Well, crack is often very much a reactive kind of humor, right? A quick, sharp response, usually in a confrontational or challenging situation. The phrase biting cracks really emphasizes its aggressive or critical nature. It suggests a verbal jab that aims to wound, maybe undermine an argument, or deliver a quick put-down, often in a rapid-fire exchange.
So less about amusing everyone.
Yeah, it's less about amusing for its own sake and more about verbal sparring. Often reveals annoyance or disdain. It's a direct, almost confrontational form of wit.
Okay. And finally, rounding out our humor segment, we have gag. This applies especially to a brief, laughter-provoking, foolish remark or act.
Foolish, right?
The example from the source is a frivolous person given to gags. What kind of humor does gag signify? It feels different.
It feels much more basic, maybe. Gags suggest something more slapstick, simple, or even absurd. It's often about the immediate, perhaps unsophisticated laugh.
Like a visual gag.
Yeah, it could be a visual stunt, like the old slipping on a banana peel, or a silly sound, or just a nonsensical remark. It aims for an easy, often physical reaction of laughter rather than, intellectual appreciation. It's associated with lightheartedness, silliness, and often a more overt, less subtle form of comedy, like the kind of humor you might expect from a clown, designed for broad appeal rather than subtle wit.
Understanding these distinctions really does help us categorize, maybe even create different types of humor. It highlights how language lets us express such subtle shades of intent, from just pure playfulness to sharp critique, all under that big umbrella of making people laugh.
Precisely.
It's not just what's funny, but how it's funny, and maybe what that says about the person delivering it and the whole social context.
Exactly. It reveals how humor, through precise language, can be, a tool for connection or a weapon for critique or just an expression of pure joy or absurdity. Each word here is like a little key, unlocking a different facet of how humans experience laughter, the dynamics of connection, how things come together.
Okay, let's shift gears again, moving from words that make us laugh to words that, well, bring things together. We often use words like join, combine, or unite, almost interchangeably.
Right? Yeah.
But our source material reveals these really precise differences in how things converge. And this section also gets into connect, link, associate, and relate. Then it delves into the specific places or mechanisms of joining: joint, articulation, suture, and finally junction, confluence, and concourse.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah. This seems like a true deep dive into the very architecture of how things connect. What's the kind of central idea holding all these terms together?
What's really fascinating here is the sheer spectrum of integration that each word implies. You go from the most superficial external attachment all the way to a complete merger where the original identities are just lost.
Right.
And then, yeah, we pivot to the super specific context for where and how these unions happen. So it's not just synonyms for coming together. It's about degrees of union, the implications for the identities of the things being joined, and the actual mechanics of that joining. It shows how language meticulously categorizes basically every conceivable type of convergence, from abstract ideas right down to physical structures. Okay, let's start with the broad idea of bringing or coming together into union. What's the first word that kind of sets the stage?
That would probably be join. Its core meaning, as the dictionary puts it, implies a bringing into some degree of contact or conjunction of clearly discrete things.
Clearly discrete things. Okay.
Yeah. The example is joined forces in an effort to win. And its antonyms are disjoin, part. So the key here really is clearly discrete things. It means the individual components mostly keep their separate identities, even when they're in contact.
So like if I join two Lego bricks, they're together, but they're still clearly two separate bricks.
Exactly. You've joined them, but they haven't become one indistinguishable thing. Or think about joining hands with someone. Your hands are together, but they're still distinctly your hand and their hand.
Right.
Or if two companies join forces for a project, they collaborate, sure, but each company keeps its own corporate identity. It's about adjacency, maybe partnership, a coming together where individual integrity is largely preserved.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so if join means keeping separate identities mostly intact, what happens with combine? Our source says combine implies a merging or mingling that obscures the identity of each unit.
Obscures identity, yeah.
The classic example. Combine the ingredients for a cake. Its antonym is separate. This sounds like a much deeper process.
Oh, far deeper.
Yeah.
With combine, the individual identities are really lost or blurred, and they give rise to something new. When you combine flour, sugar, and eggs, they don't exist as distinct things in the cake batter anymore, right?
No, it's just batter.
Exactly. They've merged to form this homogeneous new substance. It's often a chemical or physical transformation, not just putting things next to each other. It's about creating a new whole, where the original parts are no longer easily distinguishable. It implies a true fusion, a blending.
Okay, so combine is transformative. Then there's unite. This word stresses the bond by which two or more individual entities are joined and implies somewhat greater loss of separate identity.
A greater loss.
Yeah. The powerful example. The colonies united to form a republic. Antonyms are alienate, disunite, divide. So how does unite build on combine? What's that greater loss of separate identity really getting at?
Well, unite often implies a strong, purposeful bond, like a decision to become one for a shared objective or destiny. While the individual entities might keep some historical or cultural distinctiveness, their main identity becomes that of the new collective.
Like the colonies becoming the U.S.
Precisely. The colonies didn't just cease to be Virginia or Massachusetts, but they committed to this new, larger collective identity as the United States. It feels like a step beyond combine in terms of collective identity and shared purpose. It implies forming a single, coherent whole through common will or destiny, a deliberate act of coming together for a greater good, often.
Okay, so unite speaks to that collective will, a new dominant identity. Let's move on to connect. This suggests a loose or external attachment with little or no loss of identity.
Loose and external.
Yeah, the classic example. A bridge connects the island to the mainland. Its antonym is disconnect. This sounds much less intimate, maybe, than the previous words.
Yeah, definitely. Connect is about proximity or establishing a pathway, but not necessarily fusion or deep integration. The bridge doesn't become the island or the mainland, right? It just links them.
Provides a route.
Exactly. Provides a route or a relationship without merging their fundamental identities. Think of connecting 2 points on a map or connecting your phone to a charger. The connection is functional, it's external, and it maintains the distinctness of the things connected. It implies a channel, a tie, or a relationship that allows for interaction or flow, but without changing the core nature of the items.
That makes perfect sense. It's a link, but not really a blending. Which brings us neatly to link. This may imply strong attachment or inseparability of elements.
Strong attachment, yeah.
The example, a name forever linked with liberty. Its antonym is sunder. How does link differ from connect then, if connect can also be a link?
It's about the strength, I think. While connect can be loose, link suggests a stronger, more inherent, sometimes almost unbreakable chain-like connection. It often implies a cause and effect relationship or an intrinsic fundamental association. When a name is forever linked with liberty, it means that concept is fundamentally tied to that person's identity or actions, almost inseparable. It's not just a casual connection, it's a deep, often historical or conceptual bond that suggests one thing inevitably leads to or is intrinsically tied to another. It's about a profound and enduring relationship.
So link implies a deeper, often inseparable bond. Okay. Next, associate. This word stresses the mere fact of occurrence or existence together in space or in logical sequence. Our example, opera is popularly associated with high society. This sounds less about physical connection and more about maybe a perceived relationship.
It's exactly right. Associate is about perceived connection, not necessarily a physical or causal one. It highlights customary or commonly held connections, often cultural or conceptual, where two things are frequently found together in thought and observation in popular belief.
Like stereotypes, almost.
Sometimes, yeah. Opera is associated with high society. Doesn't mean opera causes high society or vice versa. It just means they're commonly found together in people's minds. It's about correlation, not necessarily causation. Emphasizes a mental grouping or a customary pairing.
That's a really crucial distinction, correlation versus causation. And finally in this group, relate. This suggests the existence of a real or presumed natural or logical connection.
Real or presumed.
Yeah. The example. The two events were not related. What's the key difference between associate and relate, then? They sound kind of similar.
Relate takes us a step further than associate. While associate is about what is perceived to go together, relate implies a deeper, often causal or thematic or maybe familial connection. It's about intrinsic relevance. There's an underlying reason for the connection, whether that reason is proven or just hypothesized.
Okay.
If two events are related, it means one might have caused the other, or they share a common origin, or they fit into the same conceptual framework. It points to a more fundamental, often explanatory bond between entities or ideas.
Okay. So if we connect this discussion to the bigger picture, these words let us articulate the precise nature of relationships, right? Whether it's between objects, ideas, even nations. It's the difference between saying, I don't know, my name is connected to something which is just a simple tie versus my name is linked with something significant, implying that profound, almost inseparable bond.
Exactly. That precision is vital for nuanced understanding and really effective communication. It prevents misinterpreting the level of integration or relationship being described.
Okay, so beyond the abstract idea of coming together, our dictionary also gives us words for the place or the mechanism where things unite. Joint, articulation, and suture. Now, this really gets into the physical engineering of connection, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. This delves right into the anatomical and structural aspects. It shows how even physical unions have distinct descriptors based on their nature and function. It highlights how language lets us classify connections by their purpose, their flexibility, their inherent structure.
So not just synonyms for connection.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
They're highly specific terms for different types of structural connections, and each one carries its own implications for movement and form.
Let's start with joint. Our source defines it as the place where or the mechanism by which two things are united. Pretty broad, applicable to either a natural or a man-made structure. The example is the complicated flexible joint of the elbow. What's the basic characteristic of a joint?
Well, the fundamental characteristic is its function as a point of connection that often, though not always, allows for movement or serves as a pivot. It's really the most general term for a structural union.
Like a knee joint or...
Yeah, or a pipe joint, or a joint in a piece of furniture. It's about the basic mechanical union designed for a purpose, where two separate components meet. It suggests a certain level of engineered design for interaction, whether that's flexibility or maybe rigid stability.
Okay, joint is the general functional connection point. Then we have articulation. This is chiefly an anatomical term applying to any joint, and this seems key with particular emphasis on the fitting together of the parts involved.
Right, the fitting.
It's used when the mechanism of a joint or the elements entering into its construction are under consideration, like the ball and socket structure of highly movable articulations, or when the process or method of joining is involved, such as the finely crafted articulation of the parts. That emphasis on fitting together seems really crucial.
It's absolutely crucial. Articulation goes beyond just being a point of connection. It focuses on the how of the fitting, the design, the precision, the efficiency of that connection. It implies that the parts aren't just joined, but they're designed to work together smoothly and effectively, like, gears in a complex machine.
Okay.
When we talk about finely crafted articulation, we mean the pieces fit together with exquisite precision, enabling perfect function. It speaks to a more complex, perhaps engineered union where the mechanics of the connection are paramount.
That makes perfect sense. It's about the finesse, maybe, of the connection. And finally, suture. This is used of a joint that suggests a seam in linear form or lack of mobility, or that has been formed by sewing.
Lack of mobility, yeah.
The example provided is the joints between the two parts of a bean or pea pod called sutures. This sounds like a very different kind of connection altogether.
It really is. Suture implies a fixed, immobile, or stitched connection. Think of the sutures in a human skull, right? Where the bones are joined in this rigid interlocking seam, allowing basically no movement.
Or sewing up a wound.
Or, of course, the literal act of sewing a wound. It's about a bond that is tight, often unmoving, and creates a unified surface, much like a seam in fabric. It specifically denotes a connection that's meant to be permanent and offers little to no flexibility, often designed for structural integrity rather than movement.
Okay, but this raises the question, why do these highly specific, often anatomical terms really matter for general understanding? They seem so niche,
Well, because they provide these incredibly powerful metaphors that extend far beyond their literal biological or mechanical origins.
Ah, metaphors. Okay.
Yeah. When we talk about the articulation of ideas, we're not just saying ideas are connected. We're drawing on that precise, fitting, smooth nature of anatomical joints to suggest that these ideas are well formed, they flow logically, they work together seamlessly.
Right, I see.
And if, say, a political agreement has sutures, we immediately get the idea of a tight, maybe unyielding connection that's been painstakingly put together and is meant to be permanent, to resist disruption. These specific terms really enrich our metaphorical language, letting us convey complex ideas with a single evocative word that captures the very essence of the connection.
That's a brilliant connection itself.
Okay.
And finally, under this whole connection umbrella, we have words describing specific places of meeting or uniting for various entities. Junction, confluence, and concourse. These aren't about how things join, but where and what kind of meeting it is. What differentiates these points of convergence?
Right. These terms describe points where things come together, but with really distinct implications for what is converging and how it's doing so. They paint different pictures, whether the meeting is of physical paths or flowing entities or just throngs of people or abstract elements. Each word emphasizes a unique aspect of the act or the place of coming together.
Let's start with junction. This is likely to apply to the meeting or uniting of material things such as roads, rivers, or railroads. The example. A town grew up at the junction of the two rivers. What's the key characteristic of a junction?
A junction implies a specific, often marked, physical meeting point of distinct pathways or physical elements. It's where separate routes intersect, like a crossroads or a railway switch point. It's usually concrete.
Like Grand Central Junction.
Exactly. Towns historically grew at river junctions because they were natural points for trade and transport convergence. It's often a point of decision or transition where paths diverge or converge, but the distinct entities remain recognizable right at the meeting point. It's a literal cross point for physical things.
Okay, so junction is a precise intersection. What about confluence? This suggests a flowing movement by which things or persons seem to merge and mingle. The powerful example. The turbulent confluence of two cultures. This clearly goes beyond just rivers.
Oh, absolutely. While literally used for rivers joining and blending, confluence evokes this strong sense of flow and dynamic merging.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's powerfully extended to abstract concepts like cultures, ideas, even historical events. It implies that distinct streams come together and mix, often creating something new, potentially complex or turbulent in the process, like in that confluence of two cultures example. It suggests a dynamic and often transformative blending rather than just a static meeting point.
And finally, concourse. This term places emphasis on a rushing or hurrying together of persons or things to form a great crowd. It may apply to a place where people throng to and fro, like hurried across the concourse to the gate where the train was waiting.
Right, like at an airport.
Yeah. Intriguingly, though, it can also apply more abstractly, like a fortuitous concourse of atoms. What's the essence of concourse?
Concourse is primarily about the gathering or thronging of many things or people, often in a bustling or purposeful way. It can refer to a physical space designed for that kind of gathering, like a large hall in an airport or train station where crowds converge. But as that atoms example shows, it can also be an abstract event where multiple elements come together, often by chance, emphasizing a large scale, sometimes kind of chaotic, coming together. It suggests a multitude, an energetic convergence of many separate elements into a dense group.
Wow. This really demonstrates how incredibly specific our language can be. Not just describing that things meet, but how they meet, where they meet, and what kind of things are doing the meeting. This precision lets us communicate complex spatial or conceptual interactions with just a single, highly evocative word. It goes way beyond just saying meeting point and gives us a much richer understanding.
Absolutely. It's all about that fine-grained detail, navigating critical moments, juncture and its relatives.
Okay, let's pivot again. Now to situations that really demand our attention. Critical or crucial times. Our source gives us this rich vocabulary for these moments. Juncture, pass, exigency, emergency, contingency, pinch, straits, crisis. Whew!
Another big list.
Yeah. These all imply some kind of urgency or difficulty. What's the crucial understanding we get by really distinguishing between them?
Well, this group of words is absolutely vital for understanding the varying degrees and types of critical situations we face. It's not simply about, a problem or a difficult moment. It's about the specific nature of the pressure, the turning point, and the implications for action or inaction.
Right.
Discerning these differences can be incredibly practical, even crucial, I think, in assessing risk, planning responses, communicating urgency accurately, whether you're in a boardroom or just describing a personal challenge. Each one carries a different weight of expectation and potential consequence.
That makes a lot of sense. So let's unpack these, starting with juncture. The dictionary defines it as stressing the significant concurrence or convergence of events that is likely to lead to a turning point.
The turning point.
Yeah, the example given. At an important juncture in our country's history, how does juncture emphasize timing and that potential for change?
Juncture really emphasizes that you're at a crossroads, a moment where multiple factors or developments are converging, creating this critical point where the future direction is uncertain but about to be determined. It's not necessarily a problem yet, but it's a point where decisions become particularly impactful.
High-stakes decisions.
Exactly. And the consequence of those decisions will be far-reaching. Think of a key moment in a negotiation, maybe, or a legislative deadline where different forces align. It's a point that's pregnant with possibility and potential shifts.
Okay, so juncture is about the moment of confluence, the potential turning point. What about pass? This word implies a bad or distressive state or situation brought about by a combination of causes.
A state.
The example is, things have come to a sorry pass when it's not safe to be on the streets. How does pass differ from a single event, like a juncture?
Well, past suggests a deteriorating situation that has often unfolded over time. It's a general unfortunate state of affairs rather than a single acute event. It's the cumulative effect of multiple contributing factors leading to an undesirable or regrettable outcome.
So it builds up.
Right. When things come to a sorry pass, it implies this regrettable condition that has gradually developed, often making us feel kind of helpless or regretful about how things turned out. It's a broader, more lingering sense of distress, a state you find yourself in.
That's a great distinction. A state versus a moment. Okay, let's move to exigency. This implies an urgent need or demand created by a juncture or pass, the source states, made no effort to provide for exigencies. So exigency focuses on the demands that arise. What kind of demands are we talking about?
Exigency highlights the pressing demands or urgent necessities that a critical situation itself imposes. It's about what needs to be done immediately because of the circumstances, a requirement that really can't be delayed.
Okay.
If you made no effort to provide for exigencies, it means you failed to prepare for frequent needs that came up from a difficult situation. It speaks to a pressing requirement for action or provision, often implying a difficult necessity that calls for immediate resourcefulness.
So exigency is about what the situation demands from us. How does that compare to emergency? Emergency applies to a sudden or unforeseen situation requiring prompt action to avoid disaster.
Sudden and unforeseen.
Yeah. The example, the presence of mind needed to deal with emergencies. That word sudden really stands out.
Definitely. Emergency is characterized by its abruptness and the immediate critical need for action to prevent catastrophe. It's often unexpected, a fire, a medical crisis, a sudden power outage, and it demands a rapid, decisive response. Often involves resources or protocols specifically designed for those kinds of sudden crises.
Right, like calling 911.
Exactly. It carries a strong sense of immediate danger and urgency, a sudden high-stakes event that demands immediate and often pre-planned intervention.
Okay, so emergency is sudden, demanding immediate action to prevent disaster. What about contingency? This implies an emergency or exigency that is regarded as possible or even probable but uncertain of occurrence. Our example, contingency plans prepared by the Pentagon. This sounds like emergency, but with a planning aspect, maybe.
That's precisely right. Contingency is all about preparedness for potential future crises. It acknowledges uncertainty, it might happen, or it probably will, but it spurs planning for those probable, challenging scenarios.
Like a plan B.
Exactly. Contingency plans are backup strategies for what could happen, not necessarily what is currently happening. It's about foresight and having a backup plan for what might go wrong, rather than being caught completely off guard when an emergency hits. It implies a calculated anticipation of a difficult future event.
That's a crucial distinction, especially for planning. Okay, let's talk about pinch. This implies a juncture, especially in personal affairs, that exerts pressure and demands vigorous counteractive action, but importantly, to a less intense degree than exigency or emergency.
Less intense, yeah.
The common phrase, "this will do in a pinch," is a great example. This sounds much more relatable, maybe more common.
It absolutely is. Pinch suggests a more personal, often financial or logistical tight spot. It's less catastrophic than an emergency or the heavy demands of an exigency, but it still requires resourcefulness, improvisation.
Making do.
Right. The phrase, "in a pinch," highlights making do with limited options when you're under pressure, finding a temporary fix. It's a situation that constrains you, forces you to act quickly, but typically doesn't threaten total disaster, just inconvenience or difficulty.
Okay, so a pinch is a manageable tight spot. How about straits? This word applies to a troublesome or dangerous situation from which escape is difficult. The example, in dire straits since the death of their father. This implies a much deeper, more pervasive difficulty.
Yeah, straits implies being tracked or severely limited by circumstances, making escape challenging. When we talk about dire straits, it really emphasizes the severity of that entrapment, a situation where you feel profoundly constrained, burdened, struggling to find a way out.
Feels much heavier than pinch.
Oh, definitely. It's not a temporary pinch. It's a persistent, difficult state, often with long-term implications, where your options are severely limited, and the path to relief is just unclear. It signifies a profound predicament.
That sense of being trapped is really palpable. And finally, crisis. This applies to a juncture whose outcome will make a decisive difference.
The decisive difference.
Yeah, the classic example. The fever broke and the crisis passed. This feels like the culmination, maybe, of everything we've discussed in this section.
It really is the ultimate turning point. Crisis is where the outcome is uncertain but critically important. It's often the moment of truth in a difficult situation, the peak of difficulty, after which things will definitively either improve or worsen.
Like in a medical sense.
Exactly. In medical terms, it's the point where a patient either rallies or succumbs. It implies a pivotal moment of high stakes and significant consequence, where the future hangs in the balance and a definitive resolution, for better or worse, is imminent.
Okay, so this raises an important question then. Why is it so crucial to distinguish between all these critical terms?
Because each one shapes our understanding of the urgency, the nature of the challenge, and the type of response that's needed. Mistaking a pinch for an emergency, for example, might lead to overreaction and wasted resources.
Right.
While dismissing a true crisis as merely a pass could be utterly disastrous. Precision here isn't just academic. It's practically crucial for effective decision-making, clear communication under pressure, and ultimately just navigating the complexities of life, the pursuit of rightness, justice, equity, and justification.
Okay, finally, let's explore words related to fairness and reason. We have justice and equity, and then justify and warrant. These are concepts absolutely central to how we organize society, make decisions, establish what's right.
Foundational concepts, really.
Yeah. They often seem interchangeable in everyday conversation, but they carry distinct ethical and logical weight, don't they?
They most certainly do. This segment gets into the foundational principles of fairness and the different ways we assess the validity of actions or claims. It's about the philosophical underpinnings of what constitutes rightness and how we provide reasons or grounds for our actions or beliefs. Understanding these is critical for navigating not just legal systems, but moral dilemmas, even everyday arguments.
Let's look at justice versus equity first. What's the fundamental difference between these two really powerful concepts?
Okay, let's start with justice. Its core meaning is the art, practice, or obligation of rendering to another what is his, her, or its due. It's incredibly broad.
Yeah, very broad.
It may apply to an ideal abstraction, like the very concept of fairness itself, or a quality of mind reflecting this, or a quality of inherent truth and fairness. It also refers to the treatment due one who has transgressed a law or who seeks relief when wronged or threatened. The example from the source: refused to allow such travesties of justice while she was judge. Its antonym, of course, is injustice.
So justice feels like it's about what's inherently right, often within established frameworks or laws. It's about balance, maybe, and upholding what's deemed correct for everyone.
Precisely. It's about applying rules and principles fairly to everyone equally, ensuring everyone gets what they are owed or what they deserve under the established system. It aims for that universal application of rules.
Okay, now let's consider equity. This word stresses the notions of fairness and impartiality, but its crucial implication is that it implies a justice that transcends the strict letter of the law and is in keeping with what is reasonable rather than with what is merely legal.
Transcends the law.
Yeah. The example: divided the pie with absolute equity among the greedy children. Its antonym is inequity. So how does equity go beyond the strict letter of the law?
Well, equity is kind of where the rubber meets the road when strict rules might lead to an unfair outcome in a specific situation. While justice might be about applying the exact same rule to everyone, equity steps in to ensure fairness by considering individual circumstances.
Okay.
In your pie example, strict justice might mean cutting perfectly equal slices regardless of need or who ate what before, but equity would consider if maybe one child hadn't eaten all day or another had already had dessert, and it would adjust the slices to ensure a fair outcome, even if the portions aren't geometrically identical.
So it's about fairness in outcome, not just rules.
Exactly. It's about proportionality and impartiality, ensuring the spirit of fairness prevails over a literal interpretation of the law or rule, especially when applying rules rigidly might create hardship. It's about looking at the human element, the context, and ensuring everyone gets what they need to achieve a similar fair outcome, rather than just what they deserve based on a universal rule.
That's fascinating how equity acts as a kind of corrective, ensuring fairness when rigid justice might fall short. It's about tailoring the right outcome to specific needs.
Exactly. It's not about disregarding the law, but maybe interpreting it with wisdom and compassion to achieve a truly just result in unique situations, looking at the human element.
Okay. And then the act of proving something right, justify and warrant. Our dictionary says they both mean to be what constitutes sufficient grounds for doing, using, saying, or preferring something. But there's a subtle yet important difference in emphasis. How do these words diverge in practice?
Right. They both concern the grounds or reasons for actions or statements, but yeah, from slightly different angles. They get into the specific kind of reasoning or support that makes an action or a claim valid and acceptable.
Let's consider justify. The source says it is preferred when the stress is on providing grounds that satisfy conscience as well as reason.
Conscience and reason.
Yeah, the example. An end that surely did not justify such harsh means. What does that appeal to conscience really mean?
Well, justify is about moral and rational validation. When you justify an action, you're explaining why it was morally or reasonably correct. You're appealing to a sense of rightness in principle, not just legality or fact.
Okay.
It's about making something acceptable or defensible, both logically and ethically. Think of a soldier who has to justify their actions in battle. They're appealing to moral principles and the inherent rightness or perceived rightness of their conduct, explaining why it was necessary and morally sound. It's about aligning actions with values.
So justify has that ethical, principled component. And finally, warrant. This is especially appropriate when the emphasis is on something that requires an explanation or reason rather than an excuse and is likely to suggest support by the authority of precedent, experience, or logic.
Precedent, experience, logic. Okay.
Yeah. The example. The deposits have shown enough ore to warrant further testing. What kind of grounds does warrant rely on?
Warrant is more about having legitimate, authoritative, or factual backing for an action or conclusion. It's less about a moral defense and more about a logical, evidential, or maybe procedural one.
Okay.
If the ore deposits warrant further testing, it means the evidence gathered gives valid reason for the next step. It's about sufficient proof or a valid basis for a decision or claim, often based on facts, data, established procedure, or a strong logical inference. It implies that a certain course of action is supported by the weight of evidence or established authority.
So this raises a key question then. Why is it so useful to have both justify and warrant in our vocabulary? They seem close.
Well, because sometimes we need to defend an action on moral grounds.
Yeah.
Right? Prove it was ethically sound or reasonable in principle. That's where justify comes in. For example, you might justify breaking a minor rule to help someone who's truly in distress. Other times, we need to show that an action or belief is supported by concrete evidence, logic, or established authority. That's where warrant becomes the precise word. For instance, new scientific data might warrant a change in medical guidelines. They reflect different types of validity and different appeals to reason, letting us be really specific about the nature of our grounds. Quick insights and curious connections.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's just briefly touch on a few other intriguing insights from our dictionary deep dive, because even seemingly simple words hold these layers of meaning that can really sharpen our understanding.
Yes, of quick hits.
Exactly. Take rile versus peeve. When might someone use one versus the other? What's the feel?
Yeah, a classic pair. Rile implies inducing a more significant angry or resentful agitation, like in the new rules rile the employees. This suggests a deeper, more sustained anger, an annoyance that genuinely stirs you up, often because something feels genuinely unfair or upsetting on a more significant level, causes a simmering resentment maybe.
So it's a bigger deal.
Yeah, it's about provoking a genuine, sometimes lasting, state of irritation or anger.
So riled is that deeper, more profound irritation. What about peeve then?
In contrast, peeve suggests arousing a more fretful, often petty or querulous irritation, like, she is easily peeved after a sleepless night. This implies a more minor, perhaps fleeting annoyance, often due to a disposition or just a slight inconvenience.
Like a pet peeve.
Exactly. It's a kind of irritation that might pass quickly, or maybe it's just a symptom of a larger underlying grumpiness or fatigue rather than a strong, justified anger. It's often a more personal, less outwardly aggressive form of irritation, maybe internal grumbling rather than outward protest.
That distinction is so useful. I can already think of people who are easily peeved versus those who get truly riled up. Okay, and finally, let's differentiate between item, detail, and particular. These seem to describe small pieces of information, but with different emphasis, right?
They absolutely do. Item applies to each discrete thing specified separately in a list or group, as in ordered every item on the list. It's about individual units, often listed in sequence or as part of a collection, where each unit is considered distinct and complete on its own terms.
Like a shopping list item.
Yeah, exactly. Like each vegetable is an item on your grocery list.
And detail.
Detail refers to small component parts of a larger whole, often minutiae that lend finish or character, like leave the petty details to others. It focuses on the smaller elements that collectively make up a whole, often suggesting intricacies or fine points that require close attention to complete something or give it character.
So the little things that make up the big picture.
Right. It's about the nuances that fill out the larger picture, often with a connotation of being minor or secondary, but maybe essential for completeness.
Okay, so an item is a distinct unit, and a detail is a small part of a larger whole. What about particular? Particular stresses the smallness, the singleness, and especially the concreteness of a detail or item. For instance, a verbal attack that included a few particulars. This emphasizes specific, tangible points or pieces of information. Often used when someone is looking for concrete evidence or specific examples.
Like, give me the particulars.
Exactly. It implies a specific individual piece of evidence or data that is precise and verifiable, often in a context where generalities just aren't enough. It's about pinning down the exact facts.
What's fascinating here is how these seemingly simple distinctions allow for such incredible precision in communication. Knowing the difference between riled and peeved helps us understand the true nature of someone's irritation. Is it a deep-seated grievance or just a passing frustration? And distinguishing item, detail, and particular allows us to describe information with far greater accuracy. Are we talking about a list entry, a fine point, or a concrete piece of evidence? These nuances are truly the building blocks of clear, unambiguous, and really impactful communication. Exactly. These small shifts in word choice enable us to articulate not just what we mean, but the precise shade of that meaning. Adds layers of depth and accuracy to every sentence. It transforms mere talk into precise, effective communication.
Outro.
Wow. What an incredible journey through the intricate world of words today. From the subtle force of a jerk versus a yank to the critical importance of a juncture compared to a crisis, we've really seen how much depth lies just beneath the surface of our everyday language. It's truly amazing how a single word, when you choose it with care, can carry so much specific meaning and even emotional weight.
This deep dive really does highlight how much nuance is packed into our vocabulary. And understanding these distinctions, it isn't just about sounding smart,
No, not at all.
It's about communicating more effectively, interpreting information more accurately, and truly grasping the specific intentions and the underlying meanings behind the words we encounter every day. It equips you to read between the lines, write with truly impactful clarity, and speak with, well, persuasive precision. Remember, language is such a powerful tool, and the sharper your tools, the better you can build, create, and understand. We've only really scratched the surface today of what a good dictionary can reveal and how much richness there is in the precise use of English. It's a constant rewarding exploration, I think.
It really is, and this raises an important question for all of us, maybe. In a world just inundated with information, where precision can often get lost in the sheer volume and speed of communication, how might a deeper appreciation for these linguistic nuances help us not just absorb information, but truly discern its quality and intent?
That's a good one.
How can being aware of these subtle differences empower us to be more critical thinkers and more articulate communicators in this age of constant verbal deluge?
Something for all of you to mull over until our next deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us on this linguistic adventure.